Thank you for tuning in to Facebook Live to hear my story. My name is Nancy Fertig, and I am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I am here to tell you about my mother because she, like so many Holocaust survivors, no longer can. Her name here in America was Rennie. Here she is. There is so much to tell you about my mother and how she survived the Holocaust. But throughout the many parts of her amazing story, there is something that stands out. She never gave up fighting to live, and she never gave up hope. My mother was named Rivka when she was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1924. She was the youngest of 8 children of Hannah and Joseph Greenblatt. There was such a great age difference between Rivka and her oldest brothers that they left Warsaw for America before she was even born. Rivka was raised in an apartment on the 4th floor of a large building at Mila 34. That block would later become known for Mila 18, the headquarters of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The Greenblatt's apartment was small and simply furnished. Rivka remembered a painting of lilacs on the wall opposite the door, which welcomed her home when she entered. She would sometimes appropriate fresh lilacs from nearby bushes to bring to her mother, and later said that the sight and scent of those lilacs represented her love for her mother. Coincidentally, I also used to bring my mother lilacs from the neighbor's bushes. Rivka's father had a small business selling leather to shoemakers and hat makers out of a stall at a market. The family did not have a lot of money, but never went hungry. They were an Orthodox Jewish family, which meant that they followed the laws and customs of traditional Judaism, including keeping kosher and observing the Sabbath. Both of her parents were devout, but her mother offered her some common sense advice.
If you have to choose between being good or religious, you better be good. So that was her philosophy.
Rivka and her mother Hannah were quite close. Hannah was very affectionate, and the two of them spent a lot of time together, doing the shopping and household chores, and going on long walks throughout Warsaw. Warsaw at that time was about 30% Jewish, and the Greenblatts lived in a heavily Jewish neighborhood, not very far from here. Rivka attended public school, but her classmates were all Jewish. In school, she learned to speak Polish, which was not what she spoke at home. The Greenblatts, like many Jewish families in Poland, spoke Yiddish. Rivka also learned some colloquial Polish from a farm girl named Jasha, who sometimes came to work for them. In 1938, when my mom was 14, she started working occasionally for a woman who had a business selling ribbons to florists. Rivka would pick up ribbons from the factory and also deliver packages of ribbons to florists. She and the handsome young supervisor at the factory would often chat, and before long, they were secretly dating. Rivka didn't tell her mother about him, partly because she was so young and feared her disapproval. His name was Aron Trajman. He was working his way through the Polytechnic University in Warsaw, studying to become an engineer. He was well-dressed, kind, very smart, and was a gentleman. He also had a beautiful singing voice. Rivka was smitten. The Jews of Warsaw had heard the terrible news coming out of Germany about the rise to power of Adolf Hitler and the ensuing anti-Semitic events and decrees. It came as a shock, though, when on September 1st, 1939, the Nazi army invaded Poland and Nazi bombers began dropping bombs on Warsaw. Before long, there were Nazi soldiers everywhere in the city, it seemed. By the time the war began, all of Rivka's siblings had left Poland except for her sister Miriam. Due to poor economic prospects for Jews in Poland, her siblings had emigrated, 3 to the United States, 1 to Argentina, 1 to Brazil, and 1 after her apartment building was destroyed in a Nazi air raid to Russia. That left only her sister Miriam with her husband and 3 young children. This is her sister and her husband and 2 of her children, along with my grandmother. During this time, the restrictions on Jews were multiplying rapidly. The Nazis forced the Jews to build a wall encircling the area predominantly inhabited by Jews, and then made all of the Jews living outside its boundaries to move into this ghetto. The Nazis required all Jews in Warsaw to register with them, but Rivka never did. Jews were also required to wear a Star of David on their clothing to mark them as Jews. Rivka used an elastic armband that she could remove, although if she was caught without it, she could be shot on the spot. Jewish businesses and establishments had to display a Jewish star. Jews were forbidden from assembling for prayer and were prohibited from using public transportation, among many other restrictions. With the deteriorating situation in Poland, Rivka and her boyfriend Aron decided that they too should flee to Russia. But before she could tell her mother that she intended to run into another country with her boyfriend, she had to tell him that she had a boyfriend. Her mother, of course, would not let her go with him unless they were married. So in the fall of 1940, when my mom was 16, they were married in a neighbor's apartment. Before going to Russia, Rivka and Aron wanted to go to Aron's hometown of Radomsko, giving Aron's family and Rivka the chance to meet each other. Her mother gave her an American $10 bill that was sent by her brothers. It was worth a lot at that time, and her mother told her to sew it into the hem of one of her dresses. Rivka and Aron packed their few belongings and, thinking it best to keep their Jewish identity a secret, set out for Radomsko in a horse-drawn wagon that they hired. Radomsko is a town with about 20,000 people, a third of them Jews. After the Nazi invasion, many more Jews from the surrounding area were herded into the Radomsko ghetto, causing incredible crowding, with resulting sickness and hunger compounding the misery. The ghetto there did not have a wall around it. Aron's family, the Trajmans, still lived in what had originally been their large, comfortable apartment. Now, however, 11 people, Aron's parents, 6 of Aron's siblings, a family friend, plus now Rivka and Aron, shared one room and a kitchen. In the other rooms of the apartment, there were other whole families crammed in. This is Aron's mother, and this is one of Aron's sisters, Branka. After a bit, Rivka and Aron set out for the Russian border, but as they neared it, all the other refugees told them that the border was closed. They were trapped in Poland, and terribly disappointed, they went back to Radomsko. They were determined to live, though, and they did not give up hope. But now they needed to find a way for themselves and the rest of the large family to keep from starving. They conceived a plan where Rivka would smuggle babushkas, or headscarves worn by peasant women, from where they were manufactured in the Warsaw Ghetto back to Radomsko, where a farmer would sell them to the peasants. He would then compensate Rivka, and she could use the money to buy more food. This was a very risky plan, because for one thing, Jews were forbidden from riding on the trains. Rivka, however, was not going to travel as a Jew. She would assume the identity of a non-Jewish Pole. With her blonde hair and blue eyes and her fluent Polish, as well as the required nerves of steel, Rivka could pass as a Polish peasant farm girl. In addition to alleviating the Radomsko family's desperate situation, traveling back and forth to Warsaw would also allow her to check on her family still in the Warsaw Ghetto. Rivka, of course, had no formal acting training, but in assuming her new role, she drew on what she had learned from Jasha, the housemaid who had occasionally stayed with her family in Warsaw. From Jasha, she had learned idiomatic Polish, as well as how to cross herself and many Catholic prayers. She learned about general Polish religious and cultural life. She also copied the way Jasha had dressed, down to how to tie the babushkas she would now smuggle. Unlike real acting, though, Rivka could never drop her mask and go out of character, because one slip-up could cost her her life. On these train trips, Rivka had the audacity to sit in the car reserved for Germans and Poles of Germanic descent. These passengers were treated better by the Nazis and less likely to be questioned. Rivka also felt that Poles could spot a Jew easier than the Germans could, and they would be quite willing to turn her in. Rivka traveled without an identification card, which was also quite risky, but on one trip found herself seated next to a real peasant farm girl about her own age. When the girl fell asleep, Rivka lifted her identification card out of her pocket. Back in Radomsko, she had her picture taken and through connections had a forged ID card made for her. She used the $10 bill her mother gave her, and Rivka became Vincentina Glodek. To enter the Warsaw Ghetto, she would either bribe the driver of the tram that went through the ghetto to slow down so she could hop off, Or she went through the Jewish cemetery that adjoined the ghetto wall and crawled through a hole under the wall. I will let my mom herself tell you what she saw on her visits to the Warsaw Ghetto.
If they caught you outside when that wall was finished, you couldn't go out that wall. And all the people from all the way around, if they didn't live in the ghetto, they had to move in, leave their apartments outside the ghetto, beautiful apartments, and just leave the furniture, everything. And in places where should have been living like 4 or 5 people, they put in like 15 people. And then they also sent all the Jewish people from around little towns. They would drive them to Warsaw Ghetto. And it got so crowded that's when typhus really came out. When they broke the walls, there wasn't any typhus or anything. But from all these people, typhus became typhus and hunger and nothing to eat. They would give a ration of 400 or 300 calories a day. The people would line up, the lines, big lines, a little bit of watery soup and piece of bread. That wasn't the beginning. After that, they took even this away. There wasn't even any bread or nothing. That's when the people started to lay in the street, hungry, swollen from hunger, little children, dead, nothing to eat. They would just, you walk by, couldn't do nothing about it, cover their face with a newspaper, and then I said, probably tomorrow, maybe I'll be laying like that. And in the evening, they would come with a big wagon, like, take all these people by the hands and legs and throw them through dead people, because they took them like sacks of rotten potatoes and make a big high pile.
Rivka did get to see her mother Hannah on these visits, and though her own strength was deteriorating, she was able to strengthen my mom's will to live by encouraging her to do everything she could to survive. My grandmother told her, "You're a smart girl, and if anyone can get through this, you can. You're young, and no matter what, you shouldn't give up." Soon, Rivka had another reason not to give up hope. She was pregnant. She and Aron kept her pregnancy a secret so as not to worry other family members, including her mother, any more than was necessary. During her 9th month of pregnancy, when she was in the Warsaw Ghetto on her way to see her mother, she was in a shop trying to buy bread for her family when Nazi soldiers entered and opened fire into the crowd. She found herself lying beneath a pile of dead bodies, shot in the chest. She stayed there playing dead until it grew dark. Her sister's friend saw her and tried to bandage her wound. Rivka made her promise not to tell her mother and also to get word to Aron through another friend. She helped Rivka to the ghetto wall where, shot through the chest and 9 months pregnant, she climbed under it and then went through the cemetery to a hospital on the Polish side. There, as Vincentina Glodek, she was taken into surgery. The bullet had gone on an angle through her breast and out her lower back, miraculously missing her internal organs. Her wounds were severe, however, and a priest and 2 nuns gave her the last rites. Hearing those words did not frighten her because she had no intention of dying just then. Her mother's words were still in her head and she intended to live. She gave birth to her son, my half-brother, in that hospital on September 15th, 1941. She named him Joseph after her father, who had died just before the war started, but could not call him that in public, so she called him Jurek. He was a beautiful little boy with light brown hair and very blue eyes. At incredible risk to himself, Aron made it to Warsaw and was there when she and Jurek left the hospital. They went back to Radomsko. She could no longer smuggle babushkas, and the family was starving. So Rivka, acting as Vincentina, would venture out into the surrounding countryside. Sometimes she asked local farmers for food. Sometimes she foraged for mushrooms and other edible plants. Sometimes she traded what clothes she had left, and sometimes she stole what she could. These trips required great determination and bravery because she easily could have been turned over to the Nazis. Her luck did not last, though. One day when she left the ghetto to look for potatoes in the fields near town, a truck stopped near her and some other peasant women. Soldiers jumped out and pushed the frightened women into the truck. They were headed to the concentration camp Majdanek to work as slave laborers. Rivka and the others were ordered to sort and then load onto trucks an enormous mountain of clothes and shoes, which once belonged to Jews who had been ordered to strip naked upon arrival at Majdanek. Rivka realized immediately that she would not last long in such a place, even as a Polish slave laborer. When darkness started to fall and she saw the Nazi guards look away, she threw some clothes into the truck and climbed in. She hid herself under the pile. She had one thought: getting out of that hell in order to survive. The truck eventually left Majdanek and my mom went with it. When it stopped, she quickly jumped out. It took her several days of walking and catching rides with farmers to get the 153 miles back to her husband and baby in Radomsko. Once again, Rivka hadn't given up fighting to live. In the summer of 1942, when Jurek was nearly a year old, Rivka took him to a city park outside the ghetto limits. An older Polish woman named Helena Kirkiewicz sat down on the bench next to her and struck up a conversation. Despite Rivka's reluctance to let her guard down when she was in her peasant character, she sensed that this woman could be trusted. So when the woman asked her where she lived, Rivka told the truth, an address in the ghetto. They developed an instant bond. Rivka maintained her farm girl persona with her because it was safer for both of them. Mrs. Kirkiewicz often invited Rivka and Jurek to her apartment, where she would give them a little to eat and her son would play the piano for them. On Jurek's first birthday, she came to their apartment in the ghetto with a gift for him. She also gave Rivka her sister's address in Warsaw in case she ever needed help in Warsaw. Even more than this concrete help, Mrs. Kirkiewicz's kindness gave Rivka something else important: hope and humanity. She was a source of nourishment for Rivka's spirit when such sustenance was as difficult to come by as food. That fall of 1942, Mrs. Kirkiewicz warned Rivka that the Nazis were going to imminently take the entire Jewish population of Radomsko on trains to concentration camps, and that if she wanted to live, she needed to take Jurek and run from Radomsko as fast as she could. Mrs. Kirkiewicz received this information from a train worker. Rivka and Aron discussed their situation and made the agonizing decision to temporarily part ways. Aron, along with many of the other men in the ghetto, had been pressed into forced labor building roads, which gave him a paper designating him as a useful Jew. The couple hoped that this would protect him from the coming deportations. The rest of the Trajman family remained in Radomsko too. They looked too typically Jewish to run away. Rivka and Jurek fled to the town of Staszow. Brunka, Aron's sister, lived there now with her husband Alec, who was a Jewish policeman. Rivka pondered her situation.
And I look out the window. Beautiful green grass. Cows laying in the grass with their calves. And I said, oh God, dear God, why didn't you make me a cow? I wouldn't have to run like this with my baby. I wouldn't have to run like a poisoned rat from place to place to place.
Soon after, Alec heard that the Nazis were going to deport the Jews in Staszow as well. Rivka and her baby ran off to the forest. She encountered a group of partisans and joined up with them. She helped them procure food from farms and she acted as a courier. They slept in the forest. But after about 3 weeks, the group wanted her to leave because they were afraid that Jurek might cry and give away their position. She had no choice but to leave, also reasoning that winter was coming and the forest was no place for a baby. When she arrived back in Staszow, she was distressed to find that the deportations had not yet happened, and so she was still in danger. Soon after, though, she heard through Alec that the Nazis now really were coming to take away the Jews. Brunka urged Rivka to go back into hiding and leave the baby with her and her husband, reasoning that they were safe because Alec was a policeman and therefore a useful Jew. It would be harder for Rivka to run and conceal her Jewish identity if she had Jurek with her. since if they were caught and it was discovered that the baby was circumcised, meaning he was identifiable as a Jew, both she and Jurek would be killed. She didn't want to leave without him, but had no choice. She took him in her arms one more time to say goodbye. She made her way to Warsaw on the train and went to an address given to her by Bronka. The woman there thought that her neighbors, the Prokopoviches, might need some help in their home and business and took her over there, but first warned her not to let them know she was Jewish because they did not like Jews. Dressed in her peasant getup of high-top boots, a short checkered quilted jacket, and her red flowered babushka, Rivka decided to add to her guise. She pretended to be mentally deficient, putting her finger in her mouth and slurring her words a bit. She figured that this potential employer wouldn't think about her too much if she thought she was mentally deficient, and it might also serve to cover up any trace of a Yiddish accent. Mrs. Prokopovich agreed to take her on as a maid and to work in their laundry business. There would be no salary, but they would give her meals and a bed in the corner of the kitchen. After a couple of days, she told Mrs. Prokopovich that she needed to go back to her farm to check on her sick mother and would return soon. She never had any intention of returning and boarded a train for Staszow to be with her son, Jurek. When she arrived, however, she found that there were no Jews, no ghetto, no Bronka, and no baby. Everyone was gone. She asked some locals where the Jewish policeman was. He's dead, the Nazis killed him. And his wife, Bronka, disappeared. Bronka's baby? It seemed that Bronka had paid a man to transport Jurek back to Radomsko to a family that had agreed to take him. But when they found out he was circumcised, they refused. The townspeople told my mom that all the people, men, women, and children, had been taken on wagons to a nearby town where they were loaded onto trains to Treblinka. Rivka was in a state of shock and disbelief, but realized there was nothing she could do at the moment to help her son. She had been told he wasn't in Radomsko, and the ghetto there had already been cleared, and she had no idea where her husband was. Since she couldn't stay in Staszow either, she went back to Warsaw to work as a maid, where at least she had a place to live. Holding out hope that he was alive, she knew she had to stay alive in order to search for him again. She continued to work for the Prokopoviches, cleaning their apartment, making their meals, and working in their nearby laundry, all the while using her false identity, playing the part of a rather slow-witted girl while remaining calm, mentally sharp, and hypersensitive to everything happening around her. She felt like she was on the stage 24 hours a day. Mrs. Prokopovich did not treat her well, using harsh and abusive language to criticize her work. But to Rivka, this work gave her a place to sleep and regular meals, something she had not had for a long time. One day when no one else was home, there was a knock on the door of the Prokopovich apartment, and when she opened the door, Rivka found her sister-in-law Bronka standing there. Bronka was also living under a false identity. Rivka hoped to hear some good news, but the news was all bad. Before the main deportations, Rivka's husband Aron had been ordered to line up for work as before, but on that day, they loaded the men onto a train, and that was the last they heard of him. Bronka told her on the day of the deportations in Staszow, after her husband had been shot, she needed to go into hiding and could not take a crying baby with her. Since the family in Radomsko had decided against taking him, Bronka gave the baby to another sister-in-law, who Bronka believed was put on a wagon with Jurek and ultimately taken to Treblinka. Rivka still did not give up hope, believing that someone must have saved him and that her beautiful little boy was still alive. On April 19, 1943, Rivka awoke to loud explosions coming from the direction of the ghetto. Mrs. Prokopovich told her that the Nazis were killing the Jews. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising had begun. Soon, smoke from the burning buildings in the ghetto drifted their way, and Rivka could smell the fires. Rivka told Mrs. Prokopovich that she needed to visit her mother again and went to see what was happening to her old neighborhood. Near an entrance to the ghetto, standing with the crowd that had gathered through the thick smoke, she could see people jumping out of the windows of apartment buildings to escape the flames, and mothers throwing their children down before they jumped. Rivka watched with a mix of horror, anger, grief, guilt, and a sense of pride that there was resistance. Rivka was torn about what to do. Should she go back to the relative safety of the Prokopoviches? Or should she join the fight? If her entire family had been wiped out, wouldn't it be better to die fighting by the side of her fellow Jews? A middle-aged woman with an enormous grin on her face helped her make her decision. She turned to Rivka with glee, asking, "Do you see it? Do you? The bedbugs are burning." Rivka turned her rage into action. She knew she would die, but headed into the ghetto to join the fighters. She entered after evening fell and made her way to Mila 34, her old apartment building. Some of the fighters were her old neighbors, and they opened the heavy gates and let her in. These fighters, like Rivka, did not expect to defeat the German army. They fought to regain their pride. They fought to die with honor. They fought for revenge, and they fought for their slaughtered families. The men and women there told her it was certain death. She told them that she had come because she felt it was her responsibility to be there with them. They taught her how to roll bandages and apply them while pressing on a wound, and how to apply a tourniquet. She made Molotov cocktails or improvised bombs. She quickly had the opportunity to use these bombs. As a Nazi soldier approached their building, she lobbed a Molotov cocktail at him. She hit him squarely, and even though he didn't catch fire, the glass from the exploding bottle killed him. They kept their spirits up by singing songs.
Sag nicht keinmal, als die Geist am letzten Weg, wenn jemand Gläuer verstellen neue Tag. Weil kommen wird nach unser ausgewünschte Show, wir werden kommen mit dem Schreck beginnen. In other words, don't say never that you're going your last way, that it's the last hope. Never give up. Just go on, because someday the sun will come and shine and your life will be good. Just to be strong. That's what I tell my children. You just be strong and fight like a cactus stands in the sun. Don't let the wind blow you down. Hold down and the sun will come out and you'll have a beautiful life.
Rivka stayed in the ghetto for a number of days and decided that she had accomplished what she set out to do. She had seen with her own eyes that her mother and sister, along with her 3 children, were no longer at Mila 34. She had participated in the fight, which held off the Nazis longer than most of the armies of the nations the Nazis invaded. But now, once again, Rivka, my mom, made a choice. She was not going to give up. She was going to live. She and a group of other fighters made their way to a sewer entrance and climbed down. The sewage level varied from down around her feet to up around her waist. In some sections, the tunnel was so low that they had to crawl through the dirty water. They made their way several blocks under the ghetto to the area outside the wall. They were lucky when they emerged from the sewer on the Polish side that no soldiers spotted them. The group silently separated in the dark. She made her way to Mrs. Kirkevich's sister, where she cleaned up before returning to her job with some fresh milk and eggs from the farm. About 6 months later, one of the women who worked in the laundry who had noticed that Mrs. Prokopovich's poor treatment of Rivka, took pity on her and told her of another job. There was a female veterinarian who needed someone to cook and clean for her. Rivka took the job, again with no pay, but with food and a bed. The veterinarian was a Pole of German descent, and much to Rivka's surprise, Nazi officers would come to the apartment for dinner or tea, which Rivka would prepare and serve. Over time, the veterinarian became quite fond of Rivka and treated her well. As the summer of 1944 drew to a close, the Soviet army was making progress toward Warsaw. The veterinarian decided to leave Poland because, as someone of German descent, she did not feel she would be safe when the Soviets arrived. She planned to take Rivka with her. Rivka played along with her until the very last moment, when she ran off the train as the whistle blew. For the next several months, Rivka, along with a large group of women, cooked for German soldiers and lived in the barracks just outside of Warsaw. For Rivka, it was again a matter of survival. She had a bed and food. Shortly after Christmas, the Germans quickly packed up their camp and left. Not so very long after, in early 1945, she was walking in a snow-covered field outside of Warsaw when she saw a strange thing. It looked as if the white trees were moving. As she watched, she realized that the trees were men dressed in white. They were Soviet soldiers. She was free. She ran to them and jumped up and wrapped herself around a startled soldier. "Why didn't you come sooner?" she asked. "My whole family would still be alive." She made her way back to Radomsko, but did not turn up any better news about Jurek. She needed to get word to her family in America. She sent a telegram to her family in Chicago. "I am alive and I'm all alone." She heard about a Jewish agency set up to help survivors. The workers in the Jewish agency in Warsaw told her to go to the United Nations Camp for Refugees in Berlin because it would be easier to immigrate to America from Germany than Poland. She rode the train out of Poland, noting how strangely easy it was now to leave Poland, and also how strange it was that her path to a more secure life was through Germany. At the refugee camp, her Chicago family sent her clothes and money while she waited for her paperwork to come through. During this time, she went to Munich to see her former employer, the veterinarian. The veterinarian could not get her mind around the fact that Rivka was something other than what she had pretended to be. She didn't believe her and told her that she was too nice to be a Jew. Before she left Europe for America, Rivka had to make one more attempt to find her son. She went back to Poland and in Warsaw went to the Prokopovich apartment first, where she found Mr. Prokopovich. She proceeded to tell him who she really was and told him that he should be ashamed of the poor treatment she had received at their hands. It made her feel better to reveal to her former employers who she really was. She then went to Radomsko and Staszow, spending 2 weeks making inquiries about Jurek, but came away with no new information. Rivka came to America in January of 1947 on a ship from Bremen, Germany to New York City. One of her older brothers met her there and brought her to Chicago, where she was enveloped by her family here. 2.5 years later, she married my father, Sam, changed her name to Rennie, and went on to have 3 children, my 2 older brothers and me. Here we are. But she never stopped thinking about her lost son, never stopped looking for him, and never stopped believing that he was still alive if only she could find him.
It's just horrifying to go with all that burns through life. I wish I'd seen him. If I would see him being shot or dead, it would have been probably easier than just going, thinking, what happened to him, where he is.
She never gave up hope, and that is her message that I will leave you with now.
Oh, never to give up. Always fight for your rights. And don't just sit back and wait that things will get better. They don't. Just like I mentioned previously, you have to stand up and fight for your right, and don't expect anybody to do it for you, because if you just let it go, it'll get out of hand. And there's a beautiful world, I tell them out there. Go for it in a nice way, but if people are rough, you just show them that you can be rougher. And don't never get weak. Don't weaken up. Never lose hope. Never. Never.
Thank you for listening.
Right, we have a couple questions.
Great.
The first one is, did your mother, or you and your mother, or you go back to Poland ever?
My mother did go back to Poland. She went for ceremonies for the commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. I think she was disappointed when she went because obviously of her neighborhood in Warsaw, everything was destroyed. So it wasn't like a feeling of going back home. But she did go back the one time. I have not been, the rest of my family has, but on various group trips, but I have not been.
When did you first hear her story? When did she share it? Kind of, and also when did you, were there details you kind of had to fill in through research and stuff?
I always knew from the youngest age I can remember that something had happened to her. I always knew that there was something, that had very dark that had happened, and it involved the Nazis, even when I was a very young child. And she gave me her story in bits and pieces. It wasn't like she sat me down one day and laid it all out. So it was fed to me slowly. And I remember it wasn't until I was about 12 maybe that I found out that she had been married before, and then maybe a year later that she'd had a baby. So, you can imagine that that's sort of something that would kind of rock a young teenager's world. She would talk about it, but she had to bring it up. Like, I couldn't just out of the blue start asking her questions. But once she started talking about it, I could ask her questions then. But we were fortunate to have this USC Show-A-Tape that you've been watching parts of. So, we have a lot of information from that. And we also have a manuscript from extensive interviews with her. So I do have a lot of information about her experiences.
This comment was, your mother's was very clever and resourceful. Did you see evidence of these traits as you were growing up and how it manifested in later life?
Yes, she was always very resourceful. Yeah, I mean, we didn't have, the most easy or event-free life as a family. So she was able to keep drawing on her strength and her resourcefulness and her pluck.
Have you ever looked into DNA testing for survivors from camps?
I have done DNA testing, on the hope that perhaps if my mom's first son was still alive, that we could find him. But no, he's never been found. And I've done other research to see if there's any record of him or anything, like through the International Tracing Service, and there's no record of him at all.
Unfortunate. What was it like growing up as a child of survivors?
Well, of course it has great benefits because, she was very loving and, she was a great mother. But there was always, a little bit of darkness about her. I think I was fortunate that my dad was American born, and so maybe served as sort of a counterbalance to all that. So maybe that atmosphere didn't really pervade the house as much as it could have. She was very protective of me and I guess my brothers growing up, which, is understandable given her story, but as a kid, you don't really appreciate that so much.
Where did you get the picture of your brother?
She got that from her sister-in-law, Branka, who also survived the war. I don't know how Branka was able to keep that picture. Perhaps she had sent it on to somebody else for safekeeping or sent it to America. I don't, there's a lot of questions that do come up, after someone passes away, not just a Holocaust survivor, but anybody that, after they pass, you wish they were there to ask those questions to them. But no, I don't know how Branka kept the picture, but it was from her sister-in-law, Branka.
It's amazing that you have it. What or how and why did you get involved with the museum? Why did you start sharing your mother's story?
Well, I've been with the museum since it opened over 10 years ago. As soon as I heard that there was going to be a museum opening well, there was always a museum in Skokie, but when they were opening in their new location, I knew that I wanted to be involved. So I've worked at the information desk this entire time. And now I joined the Speakers Bureau. This is my very first time presenting my mother's story. So I'm very excited to do that and share it with the world. But now that unfortunately many Holocaust survivors who made up the bulk of the Speakers Bureau are leaving us, second generation speakers have been encouraged to speak. So that encouraged me to, gather all the information and delve more deeply into the story and present it.
You've done a wonderful job. I would not have guessed it was your first time presenting. So great job. How old was your half brother when your mother had to leave him?
How old? He was a toddler. He was just over a year old. So yeah, just a toddler.
Wow. Let's see. That right now is all the questions I see. So I will let you close out, have some final words.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Join us here next Wednesday, February 3rd at 10 a.m. Central Time to hear second generation speaker Ron Hurston share his mother's story of survival. Please keep an eye on the Illinois Holocaust Museum's Facebook and other social media accounts, where we will post a stream of content through the weeks ahead. Thank you for your support during these extraordinary times.